Hello, and welcome to Monumental, where we sit down with entrepreneurs, leaders, visionaries, and big thinkers making monumental change. Here's your host, Evan Holladay.
Welcome to Monumental. I'm your host, Evan Holladay, and today on the show, we have Neal Bawa. Neal is founder and CEO of Grow Capitus, a commercial real estate investment company. Neal sources, negotiates, and acquires commercial properties across the U.S. for 300 plus investors. Current portfolio is over 1,800 units or beds, projected to be at 3,000 in 12 months. That's some crazy growth, Neal. So the portfolio includes multifamily and student housing properties in 8 U.S. states. Neal also speaks at multifamily events, IRA events, and meetups across the country, with nearly 4,000 students attending his multifamily seminar series each year and hundreds attending his Magic of Multifamily Bootcamps. Neal is the co-founder of the largest multifamily investing meetup network in the U.S., BAMF, a group of investors that has over 4,000 members. Neal, it's great to have you on.
Thanks so much for having me on the show. I'm really excited to be on Monumental.
Yes, making monumental change. I love it. So let's just jump right in and go into a little bit of your background and how you got into multifamily and where you are today.
Sure. Well, I'm not the typical real estate guy. I haven't done 100 loans. I haven't flipped 1,000 homes. I'm a technologist that basically fell into real estate, by accident. Through my day job, the founder of my company, I was a partner there. It was a technology education company. It was growing. It needed space, so we decided we're going to build our own campus as opposed to just renting one. And it was a custom campus, 27,000 square feet, $4.5 million. And that was my first exposure to real estate. So I started in reverse, right? Most people start with a single family rental in Kansas City that cost $60,000. And here I was starting with basically playing with $4.5 million and making huge mistakes that cost hundreds of thousands of dollars. So it was a great learning experience. It took 10 months to do the build, and I think I slept for about 10 minutes. But at the end of it, I knew a lot of stuff, right? So I was, air conditioning systems, egress, fire codes, occupancy levels, all of that stuff comes in when you're building something from scratch in California, where, you make one mistake and you basically added $100,000 in impact fees. So yeah, incredible experience, right? And 2 years later, ran out of space again and had to do it all over again. But this time, it was a larger building, 33,000 square feet. It was a larger project, $7.5 million. And we didn't quite have the money to do it ourselves as a company. So this time we had to bring in investors, right? And so he and I basically pitched the project to a bunch of rich doctors here in Fremont, California. And to surprise, in a single meeting, all of them sign up. What we didn't realize is that in the syndication industry, we were supposed to charge them a 5% development fee and a 30-70 split, and we didn't charge any of those things, right? So they're like, suckers, you don't know what you're doing. But it was a great experience. I mean, we basically did a syndication without even knowing the word syndication. Right? It took me 5 years to figure out that what I'd done was a syndication. I'm sure I broke every SEC rule out there, but it wasn't our intent to be real estate investors, right? We were just trying to basically build a building for our technology business's use. So I'm sure the SEC would look at it kindly. So did that. And so I really enjoyed the process of interacting with these passive doctor investors and, answering their questions as we were going through the whole process. And we basically chunked out the building and built everybody their own suite and then rented it back from them as a business. So now 11 years later, the suite building still rented back to us. All the investors are really happy. And so I realized that real estate could be a win-win-win-win. This was a win for my business, win for me personally. I owned one of the suites, a win for these investors, and a win for my students who got a bigger campus to run around in. And so it really addicted me to real estate. And so then I started basically going the other way. I bought 10 single family homes. I'm an amateur data scientist. I do a huge amount of research that I put out on the internet. There's 10, 15,000 people a year following that research. And the research led me to a city called Madera, California, which incidentally was the hardest hit in 2008. And so I'm one of these weird people. When I go in, I go all in. So I bought 10 single family homes in Madera in a single year. And my family thought I was insane, right? But I was looking at the mathematics of it all, saying, so it cost $225,000 to build this, and I'm buying it from the bank at $90,000. And I understand that when I'm buying it, I'm still getting $1,000 in rent, so I'm cash flowing the first year. And sooner or later, given the cost of construction is 225, there will be a reversion to the mean, and it might take 10 years to get there. Who gives a damn, right? In the
Yeah.
meantime, I'm making money. So everything that my family said didn't make any sense to me. So by the time I bought the third one, everybody in my family thought I was insane, right? So it's like the sky was falling, right? And I'm like, well, let it fall, because I'm still making $1,000 a month on every property while it's falling.
Exactly.
So I'm okay with it, falling for a while. So that worked out really well, and I still own those 10 homes, and they're up to about a quarter million. Each of them is worth about a quarter million now. And so then I got cocky. I got crazy cocky. I was like, I know everything. I know all this shit. And I go to Chicago and I buy 10 triplexes. And that was a total unmitigated disaster, like, five lights flashing sort of disaster, because I was just looking, in California, I was buying brand new coffin and broad 2005 homes. And here I went and bought properties that were 110 years old, not knowing the difference, right?
Yeah.
You can imagine I had every kind of issue imaginable, and I didn't understand this concept of demographics and how it's everything in real estate, right? To me, my wonderful audience in Madera, California was the same audience as South Chicago, right? And it wasn't. I had actually purchased in one of the worst neighborhoods in all of the country. And it took me 6 years to pull my $1.5 million out of those 10 triplexes, duplexes. And each year the pain got worse. I mean, it got worse and worse and worse. And it's like, oh my God, every possible thing that can happen, fire, trees falling on roofs. I mean, everything happens, right? I simultaneously had 7 evictions going in a portfolio that was only 35 tenants, right?
Wow.
20% of my units
Yeah.
were eviction. And so it was stunning. And the pain of it led me to a realization that one of the ways you give back to the world, of course, you give in charity. One of the ways that you give back to people is time, right? And time with your family is critical. And there's so many people here in Silicon Valley running around trying to do these turnkeys, having absolutely no clue what they're doing, right? And once they get stuck, they're spending every other weekend on the plane flying to wherever they're going, Detroit, South Chicago, wherever it is, and losing time with their loved ones. And I wanted to give that time back to people. So I started to devise a series of simple to use metrics that could be applied to any rental property in the US, single family or multifamily, to figure out if it was a good place to buy or not. And eventually I split those metrics into 2 sets of 5. There were 5 for cities and 5 for neighborhoods. And I started to teach them in San Francisco Bay Area meetups, and eventually created a course on Udemy, which kind of went supernova. Right now, if you go to udemy.com/realfocus, you'll see there's about 1,300 currently enrolled students taking that course. It's free. I give it away. There's no sales pitch. The point is, I want those 1,300 people to have their family time back and not make my mistake. I lost $1.5 million. I didn't lose money, but I could have easily tripled the money in that time frame, because all ships were rising. And so I lost that gain, that potential gain that I could have had if I knew all of this stuff. And so those metrics have become a very big deal for me. And now I also teach it in person. So I teach at about 20 conferences a year, and I teach those metrics, and people like it. And then eventually somebody gave me a nickname, which I've come to like, initially didn't like, the mad scientist of multifamily, because I'm always constantly doing data and demographics driven experiments and posting them on Facebook so other people can see. And so it's been a fun kind of progression. The company that I worked for got sold in 2013. I transitioned over into multifamily, bought one property, bought another property. The number of investors just kept going up because people liked this data-driven, geeky approach that I have. And I'm in Silicon Valley. There's geeks all around me, and they're proud to be called geeks, right? They don't get offended by it. And they like this kind of data-driven thought process that's very deeply analytical. And so I tend to attract those sorts of people to me. So last week we crossed the 1,000 investor mark, and
Wow.
next week we're going to cross the 200 million in assets mark. So we're simultaneously going to cross the 2,000 unit and the 200 million in asset mark next 2 weeks from now. So just snowballed.
That's amazing. That sounds like a whirlwind of also many different directions that we could take this in. I guess the first question I would have is along your journey. I guess was it at that stage at the university, building out that building and just kind of accidentally falling into real estate? Is that when you first started really falling in love with real estate and multifamily investing?
It was the second project, not the first one, because the first one I was just learning and I was just terrified by making mistakes, right? The
Yeah.
second time when I was doing it, I was adding architectural elements and adding, with my CEO's assistance, I was able to basically take land outside the building, 900 square feet, and build a circular cylindrical lobby with a 22-foot ceiling and a glass dome. So the second time I was enjoying myself, right? Because it was
Yeah.
like, I know some of this stuff I know, and my CEO was so brilliant at all these things, and he was helping me. And so it became more fun the second time, where it was just sheer terror the first time. And that's, I think, when I started looking at this real estate thing, saying, there's so many amazing things here that I don't get in my business, like this concept of depreciation, right? Because I own one of those suites, and I was like, this is really weird. How can something brand new be depreciated like this? And the short answer is the law allows it. Doesn't make any sense, but
Yeah.
it's like in our country, the tax laws were mostly written by rich multifamily guys to suit rich multifamily guys. And that's the way it's continued even in 2017, where a lot of the 1031 benefits were watered down. A lot of the single family stuff was watered down. They put in SALT, which is state and local taxes exemptions, were removed, and all of those were gifted back to multifamily in terms of bonus depreciation, accelerated depreciation, all kinds of taxation benefits to LLCs. And it was like, wow, I mean, I need to align myself. I can't change the
Yeah.
world. I'm not a politician, right? Or a leader. I need to align myself with the way the world works. And the world definitely works in favor of A, companies, and B, multifamily guys. And so once I started realizing that, that was the direction I wanted to head in.
Yeah, and I think you're exactly right. I think that, a lot of investors now they're like, okay, so I can get into and participate in these multifamily deals, real estate in general, and really, as far as the IRS is concerned, as far as their tax return is concerned, it looks like they're making nothing, or
They're
even in
making
some
nothing, or
cases
no,
they're
no
losing.
less. They're losing money. So
Yeah.
so here's an anecdote. So one of my friends is a teacher called Rod Cleef, and he had invited me to teach at his conference in San Diego. So I'm teaching at the conference in San Diego, and my phone keeps going off, right? So text messaging keeps going off. And then I realized that the guy that's texting me is sitting in front of me, right? So his name is KK. He's one of my investors, and he's invested in a property called Windward Forest, which is in Atlanta. I bought it last year in September. And KK is texting me furiously saying, I have to file my tax returns in the next 3 hours, and you have sent me the wrong K1. And I said, so eventually I get off the podium, I go over to him and say, what's the problem with the K1? And he says, I invested $75,000 with you. My K1 says minus 75. How is that even possible, right? And I said, well, have you heard of this thing called bonus depreciation? They just came
Yeah.
out with it in 100% depreciation. I was able to take advantage of that. The property has $3.2 million in depreciation. When you chop that amongst 30 plus investors, that's your share. And he was like, no, this can't be right. In the past, it used to be like 10,000 or 15. It can't be 75. So I said, okay. I grabbed my laptop. I write a letter to my CPA, right, with him watching, and I click send. And 5 minutes later, the response comes back and says, every single syndication client that I have is asking me the same question. The numbers are right. Please send them this email, right? So I just turned the
Yeah.
laptop around and showed it to him and said, look, the law is the law. Let's not talk about the ethics of this. The law is the law, right? You
Yeah.
got a minus $75,000, write-off on your $75,000 investment because it wasn't just you. Everyone that invested in this syndication got it thanks to the new tax laws. And I think that his jaw probably hit the floor 3 times.
That's
It's just
amazing. Yeah.
magical.
You're exactly right, and I think that's something that some people don't exactly realize if they haven't done this before. But people that know it are well aware of it, and that's a big part of why a lot of high net worth investors invest in real estate.
Well, I think all parts of real estate have that benefit, but multifamily is just insane. I mean, we are in the 9th year of a cycle, right? Rents have gone up like crazy, right? So like we've had, if you look at the 30-year trend of rent increases, it was 2%. Rents would always track with inflation, right? So in fact, if you look at a chart from 1950 to mid 1980s and you say, okay, give me inflation and then give me rents, they're almost touching each other continuously for 35 years. And then in the mid 80s, something happened where rents basically started to separate from inflation. My theory is that for a very long time we had access to cheap building materials from everywhere. Cheap wood that comes in from Canada. We had cheap labor coming in from Mexico. We had cheap everything else coming in from China, and we were just building and building and building everything at 60, 70, $80 a square foot. And then at some point, those countries started building themselves, right? Mexico started building cities with 10 million people. China builds a New York every 3 months. And when that happened, the cost of construction became more real. It wasn't this subsidized cost that we had for the last 4 or 5 decades. And now we see cost of construction going up 6, 7, 8, 9% every year, even though overall inflation is under 2%. And because of that, things have completely gotten out of whack, right? And so here we are in the 9th year of a massive cycle where rents have gone up 50, 60%, some absurd number. And last month, we had the largest growth in occupancy since 2001, right? And people tell me I'm at the end of the cycle. And I go, are you looking at the data, right?
Yeah.
Between April 2019 and May 2019, occupancy in the United States increased from about 95.5% to 96.1%, a 0.6% jump in a single month.
Wow.
That hasn't happened for 18 years, right? And that is happening now, which is why when people tell me that this is the end of the cycle, I believe that these people are basically simply saying these things because it's fashionable to say that at this point in the cycle, because nobody stops you. My question is, how is it that the long-term trend was 2%, right? And was 2% for 40 or 50 years, and has been 3% or greater for the last 7 years, including 6% in some years, which is absurd. That's 3 times the long-term trend. But if this is the end, then why is the rent growth still at over 3% in the United States? How could it be the end and still be over 3%? Somewhere your logic breaks down. So to me, I think that we are in a super cycle for multifamily. Obviously, that doesn't mean that we won't suffer during a recession. There's a recession coming. It's probably next year.
Right.
And we will have negative rent growth in that recession. Granted, nobody's complaining about that, because I believe that when that recession ends, give it 6 months, you're going to be right back into the multifamily super cycle. You're going to be right back in declining home ownership. Home ownership has now been declining 14 years. And you know what's interesting, Evan? It started declining before the Great Crash. The year of highest ownership in the US was 2005. Then it started to decline. And once again, it's tied back to the fact that construction costs were becoming so high that they were so out of whack with inflation that more and more people were not able to buy homes. And people say, there's so much new construction going on. Could you please go and Google that? Because in California, and that's the state I live in, right? So, 6th largest economy in the world. Last year, we built less homes in California with 4% interest rates than we built in the 80s with interest rates being at 22%. How could there be too many homes?
Yeah.
We have a population that is 25 million people more than it was in the 80s, and we built less homes in a year when your average interest rate is 4%. Anybody who says we're building too much simply is ignoring the data.
Yeah.
We're not building too much.
I think you're exactly right. And I think there is a long-term trend toward family renting and also having that mobility too. I think that's a big part of it is families want more mobility and care less about the larger suburban home and more about the ability to move around the world or have that control.
They do. If you look at the Wall Street Journal and Appfolio surveys, millennials place a higher emphasis on mobility and freedom than any previous generation, where previous generations placed a higher stress on the brag ratio of owning a single family home. It was very important to them. Where
Right.
millennials, their psyche has been hurt by the 2008 disaster that their parents went through, and they don't want to be any part of that disaster. They don't want to, and today homes are more expensive than they were in 2006, right? We've now gotten to the point where as a country, you're now paying more than you were paying in 2006,
Yeah.
right? And unfortunately, millennials don't make as much money as Generation X, right? Because they haven't gotten the inflation adjusted benefits that people were getting in previous generations. So they're basically, their salary on an inflation adjusted basis has gone down while home prices have gone up. And so there, the every academic, I'm not talking about real estate salespeople, because honestly, in real estate, we say a lot of stuff that isn't true. But people that are academics, if you want to read their very boring and academic white papers on the subject, the only conclusion that you can come to is that over the next 30 years, the homeownership rate is going to decline a lot, or decline a heck of a lot. Those are your three
Yeah.
choices. They actually don't have a scenario for it being flat, right?
Or
There
going
is
up.
no scenario, right? Or going
Yeah.
up. I mean, not even close, right? So that the decline, the slowest decline is it declines to 55, percent. Well, in a country where it's currently at 62%, if it declines to 55, that's 7%. You're looking
Yeah.
at tens of millions of units. Where are they going to come from when we can't even build 300,000 units of multifamily at the peak of the cycle? Nobody
Yeah.
knows the answer to that. No,
And
no
that,
one has the answer.
yeah, and honestly, that raises a whole nother slew of questions, especially from my background in development. There's so many barriers to entry for development, for
And they get worse
multifamily.
every year, right? Every
Yeah,
5
yeah, and they keep getting worse and worse. I mean, you have NIMBYism, you have communities that are just putting in all these restrictions on, what is allowed, what isn't allowed. They give more and more control to community groups, which I'm all for getting the community involved, but people just don't realize that change is inevitable. And
And change isn't all good. I mean, here we have a situation where a small group of homeowners, primarily because they want to continue seeing their homes go up, block any kind of multifamily or high density projects in the name of, pollution, or in the name of noise. But the truth is, the rest of the world is like that. If you go to other Western countries, you will not find single family zoning, sometimes in entire cities. There is no such thing as single
yeah,
family zoning. Everything's zoned multifamily, and you can build a single family there if you like, right? It's only here that with our vast resources and our vast land that we had access to, that we did this. And now basically we're struggling to go back to something that's common sense, which is we need more zoning because we simply don't have the ability to construct more single family homes. Also, America hasn't built new freeways really in the last 3 decades. If you look at our freeway system, we've added maybe 1% in the last three
right.
decades. So as you run out of usable land, if you don't build another layer of freeways beyond that, another ring, well, then you can't use that land. So now basically people are trying to simply use the land that's already inside the circle of freeways, and that land keeps going up in price and becoming more and more and more expensive. And eventually you end up just in this crazy situation where no one can afford single family and no one can afford multifamily. And that's
Yeah.
the exact situation that we're in. It's absurd and true.
And I can tell. I mean, I can hear your passion behind it, and also I can hear a lot of your data mindset and your ability to decipher that data in a very meaningful and synthesize that data in a meaningful way. Has that helped you in your ability to raise capital and get capital into all of your deals?
Certainly, because one of the benefits that I have is I live in Silicon Valley, right? So if you go and Google monster.com, the most lucrative new job in America happens to be data scientist, right? So all these technology companies, they have this ever-growing pile of data, and they're trying to find people that can kind of
Right.
sift through this and come up with actionable golden nuggets, right? People, in the Valley, people say data is the oil of the 21st century, right? And that's really true, because if you understand data and you have the ability to take data and create actionable insights, you become unique in a group of people. And so when I make these kinds of predictions and people see them come true, they're saying, Neal, what you're doing is amazing. And I'm saying, no, I just have been trained for this. Actually, there are tens of thousands of people like me. They just don't work in real estate, right?
Yeah.
So I'm very lucky in that there's not enough, data-driven guys in real estate. I started forecasting Tucson to become, 3 years ago, I was talking about Las Vegas having the highest rent growth in America, and people would just laugh in my face. I would go to a meetup group and start teaching and basically saying, I'm looking at Vegas becoming highest rent growth in America, and they would be like, you're crazy. Vegas got hit the hardest, and in their mind, the conversation ended there. But in my mind, the conversation started there, because what I said 3 years ago is that every city that got hit the hardest in 2008 would underbuild. They simply would not build because numbers would not pencil out, lenders would not lend, right? And everyone would be too afraid, right? Mindset issues. So
Emotions.
now if
Yeah.
you look at all of the top cities in America, it reads like a who's who list of 2008, catastrophes, right? So you've got Vegas, Orlando, Phoenix,
Orlando.
yeah,
Yep.
Atlanta to some extent, right? So the cities that got slammed didn't build anything from 2008 to 2014, and those cities were growing, right? Phoenix has the highest population growth in America. Maricopa County, which is the seat of Phoenix, is the fastest growing county in America. Clark County, which Las Vegas is part of, is the second fastest growing county in America. So you have all these places where population growth is insane and nobody builds anything for a lot of time. Well, you end up with underdevelopment. And so, for a year now, Las Vegas has been the reigning champion. And then I started talking about Tucson among small markets being the reigning champion. And then eventually nobody listened to me. So I went and bought something in Tucson about, a number of months ago. And guess what? Read Yardi Matrix's newsletter this month. Read it for last month. It's number one in the US. Sorry.
So
I got to turn off all the phones, not just one.
I love it. So tell me about going into your first multifamily investment.
Well, for me, it was a 12 unit, and it was in a better part of Chicago than some of the others. It was a new buildings. Sorry, it was a new build. It was a 2005 build, and it allowed me to contrast that with my other properties in Chicago and really learn a lot about not just the demographics of the place, but also the kind of product that I was buying. So I learned the difference between a building that was basically siding to a building that is to a building that somebody really wants me. So to something that was brick, and how does that impact your returns? How does that impact your gas bill, for example, right? Those sorts of things. So it was very insightful to be able to take that and start implementing it on the larger properties. When I started buying 200 and 300 and 350 unit properties, still made tons and tons of mistakes there, right? But my goal was, mistakes are okay. You just have to learn from them and see if you can write a hypothesis that's better and try that out on your next property and see if it worked. And if it worked, then write a better one and continuously improve, right? That Silicon Valley sort of burns this into your head that you have to have continuous improvement, right? And systems and processes to support and as you get better. So that's what I really enjoyed. But what I love the most about real estate is this. When I was in technology, you'd get an idea and you'd have 3 to 6 months of runway. And then people smarter than you, faster than you, with more resources than you, would get $20 million from a VC and just stomp all over you in the next 6 months. But what I see in real estate is that when you have an advantage over other people, and my company, I believe, has 3 advantages, you maintain those advantages sometimes for decades. And that's why I would never go back to technology, because the number of people that are smarter than me over there is so ridiculous that I can't be in the top of any room, right? I'm kind of in the middle of the rooms or in the bottom half of rooms. And whereas in real estate, I'm not saying I'm the smartest guy. I'm saying I'm the guy that's come from that other room and knows some things that all these super smart guys in real estate don't know and don't care to learn. And so it's an advantage that you tend to get, for years. For example, my company is 2/3 people in the Philippines, and these people in the Philippines do everything. I mean, you can't imagine all of the stuff that in my company that gets done
Wow.
in the Philippines. And I hire these superstars that are brilliant, and they have computer science degrees, and they work, Pacific hours. They work from 8 to 6 Pacific time, 50 hours a week. and do amazing stuff for my properties and get paid $6.50 an hour, right? How do you beat that? How do you beat that? And
Yeah.
people are like, no, these people are not very smart. And the short answer is, well, you don't know how to find the right people. Mine are fantastically smart, right? And almost what I'm humbled by constantly is that when I do a task, if I figure out the right way of doing that task and assign it to a really smart, virtual assistant, he's always going to do it better than me. Why? Because he's got more time. If I did it in 30 minutes and he does it in an hour or she does it in an hour, that's going to cost me $12 instead of 6. But they've got twice the amount of time. They don't
Yeah.
need to do it in a hurry. They can check off every single box. They can follow every single process. So I'm constantly humbled by the fact that all these things that I thought I was good at, these people are doing it much better than I am, with higher levels of consistency and higher levels of result. And
And
that's amazing to me.
yeah, and I love that you're bringing that up because we have a lady, Kimmy, in the Philippines who helps us on the podcast and does all the behind the scenes. Pay her $5 an hour, and you're right. It's something that would take me 30 minutes to an hour. It takes her 2 to 3 hours, but it's
So worth
time
it.
off of my plate. Yeah, it's priceless.
And some of them get really, really good. I mean, some of my Philippine staff are actually technologists. So there's one guy who's researching software to grab LinkedIn. If you connect with LinkedIn people, you get their email address. But what if they don't connect, right? Well, there's software out there that does it. They have found it in the Philippines. I didn't know about this software. As they were working on it, they said there's a software called Apollo.ai. And can we get a $10 subscription to this software so we can basically do this stuff? And I was like,
Wow.
wow, I looked at the software. It was amazing. Then they found another software that automated all of our LinkedIn outreach. It's called Meet Leonard, Meet Leonard. And I looked at this software and I was like, this is insane. I would have never found this software because I didn't have
Yeah.
the time. And they
Yeah.
had the time and they found it. And it's just amazing what you can do when you get to that level with these people. You sustainable advantages that you keep for decades in real estate. But all the technology guys, I mean, they know about outsourcing. 2/3 of all the tech work gets done outside the US anyway. So
Yeah.
you don't get to keep that advantage for more than a few months.
That's amazing. So what are you doing anything as far as the data science side that you're doing in the Philippines?
So they help me gather data. So for example, one of the websites that I'm in love with is called, oddly enough, the departmentofnumbers.com. There's an actual website called
Wow.
deptofnumbers.com, and there's a ton of data on there that is refreshed every month, especially job data, right? And obviously we want to keep a track of job data. Tucson's up there, for example, and they grab that information and they put it in different tabs. Then they basically link it together to see if they can see any kind of trends, and they share that information with me, and I share it on my Facebook and on my podcast and things like that. So they help me with basically taking data and churning through it and turning it into insights. They're not at the level where they can create that process, but they're definitely at the level where they can contribute to that process and even tweak it and improve it over time.
Yeah, that's amazing. And it sounds like, they can get you 80% of the way there, and then you take the last 20% and add the real value.
Well, it's 90-10. In my case, the way I look at it is I say, I wanted to work 100 hours a day, and it has taken me 5 years of working with virtual assistants to achieve it. I now work 100 hours every day. 10 of them
That's
come from me.
amazing.
90 come from other people.
That's awesome. I love that. So what, as far as are they doing any other systems to help? It sounds like they're helping you also with investor relations and creating new contacts.
This meeting, I mean, this podcast was arranged by one of my virtual assistants, and so she made sure that she reminded me. She reminds me about every meeting. If it's an investor, she calls them 15 minutes before. She calls them the day before and then calls them 15 minutes before. Also sends them a text message to make sure that improves my rate of actual conversation with investors.
Right.
And when I finish the call, I take 3 minutes to take my phone, and this is a video podcast, so I suppose I could show these kinds of things. So when I'm done, I basically write notes, right? So these are my Slack notes. I write in a software called Slack,
Yeah.
and you can see all these notes, and that's action items that my staff is taking with those investors, right? And on and
Wow.
on and on. You got pages and pages of notes about investors that they're taking actions on. And so once again, they're saving enormous amounts of my time because I'm good at building systems and processes and templates and assigning them to people and training them on those templates. And Slack is our chosen tool to do that because everything in our company has a Slack channel. And so that way, if I lose a person, the new person that comes in reads the Slack channel. It takes him several hours to read that Slack channel, but at the end of it, they really know what the last guy was doing.
Wow. Yeah, that is a very good point. I mean, that's something that I think a lot of people worry about. And we've set up like training videos as we're doing things and keep those on file for new hires. But I think that's a great point of keeping track of prior conversations and prior data
Well,
through a
the,
Slack
the,
channel.
the challenge with doing we do the videos also. We use a tool called Loom, Loom. It is a plugin in Chrome. It's free. And so whenever I want to talk about a system or a process, I don't actually build structured training programs. I don't do that because it takes too long. What I do is I put on this headset and I click the Loom button in the Chrome browser, and then I start to talk. And as I talk, I bring up web pages, I bring up Word files and Excel files, and I will, randomly start to build basically tables of what the reports look like. I'm not trying to do anything systematized. I'm simply trying to get all of my thoughts out in a stream of conscious 5-minute video. And then when I'm done, Loom immediately gives me a link, and I plug that into a brand new Slack channel if this is a new thing, or in an existing Slack channel if it is. Now that video is sitting in Loom, right? And the moment that that virtual assistant reads that video, what's the first thing he's supposed to do? Turn that video now into a set of systems and processes and bullets and action items and sections and send it back to me for editing. And I can tell you it's 10 times easier to edit that document than it is to write it from scratch. And I don't think I would have written a bunch of these articles ever if that was the way to do it. So I basically do it in an extremely unstructured stream of consciousness format. And then they bring it back to me and I edit it. So now I'm doing that last 10% of the work because when I'm talking, I can just think. I don't have to do anything. I don't have to type stuff out. Nothing is slowing me down. I'm just simply thinking, right? And that video, that Loom video is forever going to be in that Slack channel. So the next guy that comes in can watch that video, and then the document that they've created from it also gets thrown into that Slack channel, and they get pinned. What that means is there might be 10,000 posts in that Slack channel, but only a few dozen items that are pinned. So you can always go back and find those things. So in a way, we never had to write manuals or create folders or create websites or intranets. Slack is our intranet.
Yeah, that's amazing. Well, Neal, I feel like we could go on for hours and hours. There's a lot of value in here, but let's jump into our monumental questions. So, what does success mean to you?
Success means being able to do what you want. Success means not feeling any bounds. Success means if I wanted to go off to backpack in Europe with my 17-year-old next month, that I can do it. Success is not money. Success is feeling a sense of achievement and feeling in control of your destiny.
I love that. Yeah, it's a sense of achievement and destiny. I completely agree. Do you have a morning ritual or a daily habit that contributes to your successful day?
Well, it's actually an evening habit. So what I do is before I end for the day, I plan my next day and I take 5 minutes to make sure that my next day is set up. I have a good understanding of what my calendar looks like. Often I'll make changes to it because I feel like it's not productive enough. So I never finish my day until I'm done with this. I'm also extremely calendar driven. If I showed you my calendar, it's gridlocked. So there's almost never any slots available in a given week. Obviously, there's slots in the future weeks, and I like being that way. I like having everything set up in a calendar. And you might say, well, that doesn't allow for free thinking. The short answer is I schedule free thinking times inside of that calendar.
Yeah, I love that. Yeah, that's something I've been working on myself and getting better and better. Is setting aside time for that free thinking, for that self development, for just random thoughts or journaling or reading. Pushing yourself to be learning. I think is so huge and really pushes you to that next level.
Absolutely.
So what is your favorite book or book you're currently reading?
There's no such thing as a favorite book for me. I think it's whatever book catches my fancy at the moment. The one that I like right now is called Traction, and there's a lot of great books about how to get started. Traction is about, okay, you got started. How do you get to the next level? And for somebody like me that has a company with 16, 17 people, I think that next level is what challenges me. So reading a book like Traction and understanding how to get from 16, 17 people to 1600 people is very exciting. And what I like about Traction is it's very prescriptive in nature. It's not trying to say you should do this. It's trying to say this is exactly how about how you go about doing this, step by step, A, B, C, here are the processes, right? I love prescriptive sort of books because I can immediately jump into implementation. So check out Traction.
Yes, that's actually I'm reading Principles right now, but Traction is next up on the list.
Awesome.
So I'm pretty excited for it. Well, Neal, honestly, I feel like we're gonna have to do another episode or two because there's a few topics that I wanted to cover. We just did not have time. But I would say in closing, how can people follow you or reach out to you?
Well, I aggregate a massive amount of content. I'm, more than 40 speakers that basically speak on my platform. When I created the website, it was called Multifamily U, with U standing for university, multifamilyu.com. And then over time, I realized that it didn't make sense to just focus on multifamily. So it basically became a real estate deep dive webinar platform, because I saw people doing excellent podcasts, and I know that there was enough there, so I didn't need to ever be a podcaster. I'm subscribing to podcasts and listening to them myself. But there wasn't one for deep dive, high content, 90-minute type webinars that you can learn from, because there's some things you really need charts and graphs to learn from, and you can't do that over a podcast. So multifamilyu.com is basically that portal. We have 30,000 plus people a year that watch, that register for webinars there. My email address is Neal, Neal, at multifamilyu.com. Send me an email. I'll definitely answer it.
I love it. Well, guys, take Neal up on it. He is literally, as you've seen in this episode, he is chock full of knowledge. He knows what he's talking about. He's an amazing resource, and follow him. And if you all enjoyed today's podcast, make sure to share it on social media. Tag me, tag Neal, put it on LinkedIn, put it on Instagram, wherever you are, Facebook. Let people know you're listening. And with that, have a monumental day.
Thank you so much, Evan.
Yes, glad to have you on, Neal.